So you got plans for a backpacking trip, a bike trip, a canoe trip, or some other great adventure that has you spending a few nights on the trail. But to do so, you'll need to fuel yourself with something to eat. I know I can only live so long on granola bars, and trust me, nothing beats a hot meal when you're tired, wet, and cold. Dehydrated meals are a great way to bring nutrition with you on the trail. Lightweight and easy to prepare and tasty, dehydrated meals are the go-to for any high-adventure trek. I'm Alan Percy, a guide and program chair with Birchbark Expeditions, and in this video, I'll show you some tricks we use to prepare dehydrated meals quickly and safely without a lot of waste. So let's get started. Alright, so let's start out with taking a look at the materials you need to prepare a meal. And it starts really with this plastic sheet here I've got here on the table. Normally what would happen is you'd be setting up camp and you're probably going to be preparing a meal near a fire pit or maybe someplace, communal area within your campsite. You're probably going to be doing it on the ground. And it would be really nice to not have to drop something and, a spoon or maybe some of your food on the ground and lose it basically because it gets all dirty. So I learned a long time ago to just bring a piece of plastic with me. I call it a tablecloth. In this particular case here, it's just a black plastic sheet. And we lay this out on the ground. So that's step number one. Step number two is let's just quick go through all the other things that are here. Well, certainly you're going to need a pot of some type or another to heat your water up in. I brought a couple different samples here. It really depends on your group size. If it's just you going out by yourself, a little small pot like this would be perfectly satisfactory. Maybe if it's a few more of you, you might need a little bit larger pot. And when we send our big Birchbark cruise out, we send a much larger pots even than that. So, yep, you'll need a pot that's appropriate for the size of the group that you're going to be traveling with. For today's demonstration, I'm just going to use this small one here. All right, next, of course, you're going to need a stove and a standard issue we supply our Birchbark Expeditions with are these little MSR pocket rocket stoves. This particular one, we use the isobutane, which is an easy fuel. It's easy to travel, and one of the most common questions is how much fuel do I need? One of these canisters for one or two people will last you a number of days. We send our crews out with 3 canisters for a week, and that's for a crew of 8. So that gives you some idea of the quantity that you would need. Now, almost all these little stoves thread on to the top of that. So the first thing you're going to do is pull out, the mounts and supports and make sure that they're all nice and in position and locked in. Every stove is a little bit different. And also too, you're going to try make sure that the valve is closed before you actually mount it to the stove. So that's going to be important. Now we're going to actually thread it onto the stove. And if you are in the middle of this process, get a fuel leak or something like that, of course you want to immediately stop and set it aside. So there's our stove all set up, ready to go. Now, the next thing is how much water are we going to need? We've got our meal here, and we're going to read the instructions here on the meal. And one of the first things it talks about is opening the package, removing the oxygen absorber, which we'll cover here in just a moment. But we're going to need 2 cups of boiling water for the pouch. So what's that mean? It means we need a measuring cup. You need some way of measuring a couple cups of water. So we're going to have that. So I've got my pot, measuring cup, and of course some water. Just a small amount, really just a couple cups for this, and maybe a few extra cups for cleanup afterwards. So you need an amount of water. One of the questions always is, does this have to be treated water? And of course, because we're going to boil the water, it doesn't really have to be treated. If it could be relatively clean, doesn't have things floating in it, would be good. It's never nice to get a surprise in the meal while you're in the middle of it. So there's that. A couple other things I got here. One of them is, of course, is our a mess kit or our bowl. I guess if it's just me, I could eat out of here or I could eat out of here. We got a large group and you're divvying up a large supply of food. You probably don't want to be sticking your spoon in the same food. So you guess you could eat out of this, but it's not very pleasant. And now let's talk about this for a second here. This is what we call a rehydration pack. It's basically an insulated pouch, and we make these up. It's kind of a little project. It's made out of that silver kind of bubble wrap insulation, and they work great as a way to help with the rehydration. So we make it up so that the bottom has got a little kind of eyeball shape to it, and just use duct tape to hold it together. And we usually put some kind of clip that goes with it to either help it stay closed or to close the bag. All right, so we got our materials all ready to go. We're going to just make this one small portion, but I talked about larger portions. When we send our crews out, we send them out. We supply them with number 10 tins of food, which are much larger than this. Large cans, they're the size. They're larger than this, twice the size of this, with dehydrated food. And of course, they don't want to carry that on the trail. So what we have them do is we supply them with roaster bags. These are turkey roaster bags. It's a high temperature plastic bag that we send them out with, and the intent being is that they're going to rehydrate their food in the roaster bag. Now, one of the oddities about the roaster bags is first you got to find the entrance to them because they all are a little different. One of the oddities about these is they're a great way to rehydrate a large amount of food and carry it, but they have these little corners, and the corners always seem to collect all the food. So we learned a long time ago to just take the bag, take one of the corners and just put a little simple knot in the corner, and this will stop the food from hiding in the corner. It makes it easier to get it all out of the bag later, and make sure you rehydrate all the food, not just a small portion of it. So just quick tie a little knot in one corner and do the same in the other corner, and you'll be much happier with the end result when it gets all done. So there's the one corner. So let's do the second one. We'll just do it here for this camera here. We're going to just put a simple little knot in the corner to, again, to keep the food out of the corner. All right, so just push that through, snug it down, and there's our bag. So now what we would normally do is we would put the dehydrated food in base camp, or before you leave in here, maybe put the whole thing in a Ziploc bag. Of course, you would put the instructions in with it so that you can remember how much food to put in the bag. And then I'm going to treat this in this bag as the same. These small bags here you could rehydrate directly right in the bag. But again, if it was a larger pouch, we would use this bag. So I'm going to set that aside. All right, so let's measure our 2 cups of water, and then get the stove started, and then we will go on with take a pause, and then we'll go on with the rehydration in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to measure off my 2 cups of water into my little pot. Now in a larger situation where you're trying to do a larger meal, you're going to need a lot more water. You can either measure it before you get it hot, or you can measure it after. Which do you think is safer? Yeah, measuring it before is a lot safer. So kind of encourage that. All right, so let's get this little stove going here. All right, we got our stove going. So let's put the water on there, and while that's warming up, let's talk about opening up the food package. And again, it doesn't matter if it was a big giant can or this little pouch here. The pouches are great for 2 to 4 people. When you get up 6, 8 people, these have a lot of waste and they're expensive. That's why those big cans kick in, and they're much better value. But for just 1 or 2 of you on the trail, this is a great way to go. So we're going to look for the little notch. We're going to rip open the top. And one of the first things we need to do is we need to open this up, and we need to look for the oxygen absorber that's in the can. I'm going to just show this camera here the inside. And in there is this little white pouch, and you don't want to fish that out. So there's this little white pouch here, and you're going to want to put that aside. You don't want to eat that, so we're going to set that aside. But then here we got our dehydrated food inside the pouch. When we get ready to put the hot water in, we'll just pour it right in there. So let's wait for this to get going here. Okay, we're back, and our water is now boiling. It only took a couple of minutes. So we're going to shut the stove off, and we're going to be really careful here because this is obviously pretty hot. I'm just going to slide this out of the way. And of course we're going to pour our 2 cups of water into our dehydrated meal. So just going to be careful here not to... Now you'll notice I'm not holding the bottom of this bag. That is one of the common mistakes we see sometimes, is a scout will be holding the bag when you pour the hot water in. If you're a leader or advisor on a trek, you want to watch for that, because that's a serious no-no. They're going to end up burnt because it's obviously boiling hot water. So now, of course, we're going to want to give this a stir. And guess where we're headed with the spoon. You guessed right if you guessed the deep dark corners, because that's where the dry stuff all hides. So we're going to go into the deep corners and we're going to dig that out. I'm going to do the same thing on the other corner. And I know the spoon's round and the corner's square, but we've got to do our best. We'll dig it all out. I'll give it a stir, and now we're going to pull the spoon out, set it aside, and what we're going to do is close up the pouch. And if it were the big roaster bag, I'll show you in a second how we would do that. We want to make sure we get this completely closed. Make sure the Ziploc is sealed all the way. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put it inside our rehydration pouch. And then we're going to use that clip to hold that closed. And we're going to set this aside. Now this particular recipe said it needs about 8 to 9 minutes to rehydrate, so we're going to let that rehydrate. Meanwhile, let's just talk about this again, the roaster bag. Like we said, one of the tricks that we've learned to do with a roaster bag when putting the food and the hot water in is to use one of your larger pots. This one's not quite large enough, but you put the bag in a larger pot, so that then when you put your food in to the bag, and then pour your hot water, there's some support, right? What you don't want to do is have this tip over or dump. Obviously that would be really, really bad. And once that's all done, we'll then pull the bag up. Of course, our hot water and food will be in the bottom, so it'll hold up. And then we're going to bunch it all together, and we'd use that clip, for example, or another clothespin, or some of these come with a little zip tie, and zip tie it shut. Then carefully lift it out and put it into our rehydration bag. And that would make sure that that food stays in the bag and doesn't get dropped on the ground. So that's the basic process of getting the food ready to go into the pouch. Let's just give it a couple of minutes here. We should be watching our watch and see how it turns out. So let's just give it a couple of minutes. Okay, it's been about 9 minutes, so our meal should be rehydrated. So let's open her up and see how it looks. Well, it smells good, I can tell you that. Still very warm, nice and warm from being inside the pouch. And the pouch did a really good job of keeping it hot during the rehydration process. And now we can open up our meal. We're going to give it one more stir before we actually serve it. Just make sure there's no chunks floating around on the bottom, and then it's time to, of course, then serve it. So let's pour a little in the bowl here, and this, like I said, this package has food for 2. So there you go. This is spaghetti with meat sauce, and a little hot sauce would make this probably outstanding. And with that, I've shown you how to prepare dehydrated food on the trail. And I wish you good luck on your trek, and bon appetit. Hot. Till next time.